I'm sitting in the parking lot of an attraction in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, and I wanted to just give you a short summary of a conversation that I had with someone who lives far away from me and who has a very different accent than mine, who was astonished by my last few videos dealing with the King James only movement. He said he's never heard of anyone being King James only, and he asked me how big of an issue it really is. Surely it must be limited to a small minority of believers, he said. As I began to explain the situation, he had no idea that a considerable group of Christians divided over a particular English translation of the Bible and that it was so widespread. King James onlyism exists primarily, but not exclusively, in one area: fundamentalism. Even more specifically, independent Baptist fundamentalist churches. What started out as primarily a Seventh-day Adventist movement was adopted by early fundamentalists within the independent Baptist movement. Men like Peter Ruckman, Harold Seitler, Lester Roloff, and Jack Hyles began to hold to a more extreme version of fundamentalism that considered many more issues fundamentals than their predecessors. But there were holdouts. Dr. John R. Rice was one of the key fundamentalists who refused to embrace King James onlyism. Another was Bob Jones, and Bob Jones University is anathema to many independent fundamental Baptists because they did not change when these others did. John R. Rice, the founder of the Sword of the Lord, would often preach out of an ASV and even use a Catholic Bible as an evangelistic tool in his preaching services. Although he was pressured greatly, he refused to change from his historical view of biblical preservation and inerrancy. His successor, Curtis Hudson, changed after being pressured by Jack Hyles. This proved to be the turning point for King James onlyism and when it went mainstream. What used to be a strong preference has now become a hard requirement for many independent fundamentalist Baptists in America today. Why? The Baptist Bible Translators Institute of Texas was founded in 1973, and this is their statement on the authority and standard that is the King James Version. They say, "We believe the King James Version to be this holy Bible, the inspired, preserved Word of God in the English language. We do not mean that the English language translators were inspired as they translated. However, because what they translated is an accurate and faithful translation of the inspired Hebrew and Greek text, the King James Version is therefore the inspired, preserved Word of God in the English language. We believe the Masoretic Hebrew text and the Textus Receptus Koine Greek text to be the inspired, preserved Word of God in the Hebrew and Koine Greek languages." So why is this a dividing issue? Because they believe the King James Version to be a perfect translation. An even more extreme group, known as Ruckmanites, hold that it is not a translation, but a divine re-inspiration of the text. The Baptist Bible translators and the many King James Version only churches that believe like them hold that the King James Version is the perfect English translation. But there are some major problems with their logic. First, there are many different editions of the King James Version, and they outright contradict each other in places. There are hundreds of differences between editions. None affect doctrine, but they cannot all be perfect. The next flaw in their logic is that they believe that the TR is the perfectly preserved and inspired text in Koine Greek. Why is this a problem? Because the King James Version differs from any TR in many places. As a famous King James Version book is titled, "Things that are different are not the same." How can the TR be the inspired, preserved Word of God in Koine Greek and the English be perfectly preserved and inspired in the King James Version when they don't line up anything close to perfectly? This illustrates a terrible inconsistency, but one I believe to be largely based on ignorance. Most people simply don't know what the TR is. They've just been told it's the received text and assumptions follow. Sadly, that's where the inconsistencies begin, not end. Most King James Version only pastors have a library full of books from non-King James only pastors and theologians. In the circles I was raised in, every preacher and Sunday school teacher was encouraged to have J. Vernon McGee's Through the Bible series. He often quoted from other versions and noted where he said the King James translators got something wrong or where something was better translated in another version. And yet, we were told he was a great Bible scholar and teacher for Christians to learn from. Warren Wiersbe was another. Everyone around me collected his B-series books like others do comics and baseball cards. He also was not King James only. I remember one school I attended for a while put stickers in the textbooks that were not King James only, but they still used them. One may make the argument that reading one's material isn't the same as listening to non-King James Version only preachers preach, except many King James only pastors do listen to non-King James only pastors quite often. I had some good King James only friends that used to talk to me about their favorite Vodi Bakum messages. Someone I have a great affinity for boasts that his brother is the greatest Christian he knows. Now, this man is a hardcore King James Version onlyist, but his brother uses the New King James. Again, there's great inconsistency among that movement. Study behind non-King James Version onlyists, listen to them preach online, but do not dare hear someone who preaches from the King James Version only, but reads other versions as well. I don't talk about this to be rude or condescending. My point is that the inconsistency does need to stop. If you can have their books, listen to them preach in secret, host singers who are not King James Version onlyists, then why not fellowship openly with non-King James Version onlyists?